It
I
says
see it up in my corner where it says you're recording.
it says I just started recording now. I I don't think I was before. I
That's
don't This is why me and Zoom are fighting this week.
It's okay.
Do you mind starting over? Okay. Ben, welcome to the Hollyfield Nutrition Podcast. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a long time in the making, and we had some technical difficulties to start out, so I appreciate you bearing with me.
Hey, I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful this is finally coming to fruition and we're about to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's I haven't done a topic or a podcast dedicated to the topic of diabetes in probably a year. So it was definitely something we were due for because yeah, we have quite a bit of people with diabetes in the endurance space, and there's just not like a lot of information out there that overlaps really well to both. So it's just great to have you here. Can you tell everyone who you are, where you're located, and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Ben Tzeel. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength coach, and I've had type 1 diabetes for 26 years myself. And ultimately, every day I'm bringing people in the diabetes community knowledge on how to have better blood sugars while living life unrestricted by their diabetes. And I live in Tampa, Florida, which I absolutely love.
Oh, nice. Nice. Are you from Tampa?
I wish. No, I'm actually from the Midwest, good old Wisconsin and Michigan. Yay. And then I escaped because I couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah, it's nice and the weather's very different in Tampa. I'm in
Just
New Hampshire, so I the cold is not my favorite, but it's just you guys have the summers, we have the winters. If you could have both, that's ideal.
snowbird season.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really cool that you bring to the table not just your expertise, but also the personal experience of growing up with type 1 diabetes. Yeah, I mean, can you kind of tell us what made you want to become a dietitian and get into the specific niche that you're in? I imagine it overlaps with some of your personal experience too.
Yeah, so I mean, I was diagnosed at the age of 7, which is wild to think about. It's been that long. But that being said, it was always a constant chorus of no's. It was, no, you can't have the birthday treat. No, you can't go be active with your friends. No, you're never going to get strong. And I got really sick of being told no from such a young age. And so I took it upon myself to say, how can I figure out how to do this? And I like sports. I want to play sports. I want to be strong. I want to eat the foods that look like fun. And so ultimately, over time, I was like, hey, I enjoy working out, but I keep seeing nutrition is the X factor for both blood sugars and for performance. So let's dive into that. I realized, hey, I like research. I thought I wanted to get a PhD focusing on type 1 and nutrition. Realized I want to deal with people instead of data sets, and then switch to become a registered dietitian. And ultimately got here because it was always people could do 2 out of 3. They could do nutrition and exercise, but not diabetes, diabetes and nutrition, but not exercise. So I'm like, let's just become the intersection of it all.
Yeah, that's like true unicorn right there because I agree. It's really hard to find. It's really hard to even find dietitians who like also have like a personal training certification or any exercise like type of background, which was really surprising to me when I went to dietetic school because I felt like they should overlap more, but they really don't. So that's really cool that you sought out all that additional education and background just based off of your own interests. What kind of like working out, sports, what kind of stuff are you into or did you do growing up?
So once upon a time, I played baseball till my elbow said it didn't like me anymore.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I played volleyball like up through high school, did some, sand tournaments in college, but it's really just been strength and conditioning. So, getting stronger. I did run a year of cross country in high school because I thought it would be fun. And it was fun. It was just different than I expected it to be. And then I, played around with some track stuff in college. And then I kept getting injured. I learned that that was just a Ben problem, not a diabetes problem, but I won't bore you with all the details there.
Nice. Yeah, no, the strength background's definitely awesome and very helpful and relevant to our audience who are also trying to get stronger, even if they're also running a lot. Um, so I mean, in terms of how you like work with and help clients and people in your community, I know you've got like a team of dietitians. I know you were talking about how a lot of them also have type 1 diabetes, so they have that shared lived experience. What are some of the biggest like challenges that you see in your clients and in particular the like people who would identify more as athletes when they're trying to manage type 1 diabetes?
I think one of the big things, and I think you probably have seen plenty of this as well, is just the stigma surrounding carbs. Especially, I mean, diabetes land, it's really, really, really prevalent. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you carbs are an absolute must. You have to have it. Like I've seen people who have, run very long distances without eating carbs who have diabetes with great blood sugars. But I've also seen people that eat 700 carbs a day and run long distances and have great blood sugar. So it's just this polarity of people think carbs are the devil, carbs are the worst. Oh my God, my blood sugar is going to go super high. But it doesn't have to be like that as long as you manage them correctly, you time them correctly. And that's, I think, just where people get so hung up and it just becomes this you're with it or you're against it. And there's no middle ground. And I feel like there totally is a middle ground.
Yeah, like the middle grounds where we probably both live, have
Yep.
made a home. Yeah, I agree. I think it's like that. It's really a double whammy, I'm sure, for people who are endurance athletes with diabetes, because you kind of get there is the same polarization in the endurance community where we're fat adapted, we're running with, no fuel, and that's something that's kind of like glorified. That's not really super well supported by a big body of research. And then we've also got people who are like, yeah, let's like slam as many carbohydrates as possible. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around carbohydrates. I think, especially as it pertains to the misconception that it's going to give you diabetes. If you don't already have diabetes, if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, if it's going to make your diabetes worse, if you do have diabetes. And also body composition changes and fear of weight gain, I know, is a really big one in the endurance community. Do you see like a lot of those same fears with the overlap?
So yeah, I would say the weight gain, especially because people think of it as, well, if I'm having carbs, I need to take insulin, assuming they're, on insulin. And then if I take insulin, they get told again and again by their doctor, insulin makes you gain weight. When the reality is insulin independently does not cause the weight gain. It's typically the calories being out of balance where you've taken in way more than you've expended. That's where the weight gain hits. But because when people have type 1, they're diagnosed, they probably lost 20 or 30 pounds because they were not diagnosed and they didn't know what was going on with their body. They suddenly rapidly regain this weight that's really just their body restoring itself because they're not starving to death and withering away. As a result of that, people start to fear the insulin. And then as a result, they fear the carbs. And that's something that has to be one of the first things that we try to break from a mindset standpoint, because the insulin for type 1s keeps you alive. There's not a choice in the matter. Like, you have to take the insulin or you are, not going to be with us. And that's the scary part about it. And it just becomes this battle of, how can I take as little insulin? Like, no, you want to keep your number in range and prioritize that and nourish your body at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, like just to explain, yeah, like what's actually happening with eating carbohydrates, taking insulin, and how carbohydrates come with calories. And there's kind of this whole, there's a lot of nuance to what could influence body composition changes. It's interesting too. Like I know you mentioned with a lot of like the stereotypical person diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, like they've lost weight because they're just, yeah, they're not really getting any of the energy that they're putting into their body because their, kind of process isn't working well to get it into the cells. I imagine like when that weight loss happens too, for some people, yeah, the regain can definitely be kind of scary and maybe even a bit triggering. I know that's the case for athletes even without diabetes, as their body changes just with age or like over the course of time. Being an athlete, your body's going to change, and people who are athletes tend to be really in tune with their bodies. How do you help people navigate that, especially the body comp changes where you're gaining weight and it's like a good thing?
Well, I think with that too, right? It depends where we get them in the journey, because we've had people as early as, "Hey, I found you guys while I was still in the hospital before I was even discharged," which that's my favorite because I'm like, you're a blank canvas, blank slate. We can make sure you learn all the correct stuff. But on the flip side, there's people that have had this for years and they already have gone through that. I think framing it in a way of, hey, can we make your blood sugars in as good a spot as possible? Because that's going to lead to the best long-term health outcomes. If we can have your A1C well under 7, keep your time in range with your blood sugars, well over 80%, and still have that flexibility of eating food, your body composition, as long as you're getting the stuff that your body needs, you're getting the protein, you're getting, the quality fat sources, ideally some sort of fiber throughout the day too, you're getting those things, your body's getting what it wants, the body composition will likely take care of itself. If you're way out of balance on the calories, well, yeah, that's going to be a different conversation, but that's something that's easier to fix, especially when the blood sugars are already on point. When your blood sugars are constantly up and down, you're having to treat all these low blood sugars, that's extra calories. That's where people can run into issues. So I tell them the blood sugars come first. After that, everything else will typically fall into place.
Yeah. And that really goes too without diabetes too. Like if anyone's listening to this, kind of just for fun, because you're trying to support someone else or you're a professional, like That's how we approach everything, at my practice is you really got to look at the blood sugar control with or without diabetes. It's going to be a little bit more, complex medication, medical interventions with diabetes. But yeah, if your blood sugar is controlled, your hunger cues are probably going to be reasonable. And you're going to be able to, yeah, take in what you need. A really big issue that I know I see, I'm really curious to ask you about in the endurance space is we know at least about half, of endurance athletes of all levels are underfueling, really prone to that for a lot of reasons. One, yeah, there's some messaging around like, you don't need it. Carbs are bad, so people are purposefully underfueling. Two, I think there's just some ignorance, like people just don't know. And three, when we do work really hard, sometimes our appetite doesn't match. Like it doesn't, go up. It can even go down with the stress of training. How does diabetes and trying to manage like blood sugars, especially if you are taking insulin, typically affect that kind of whole picture? Does it, I imagine, make it a little bit more complicated?
Just a little bit on the complicated side, but I think the biggest thing that you mentioned is that people, are they eating enough, right? And I would say, quite honestly, 80% of the people that come to our practice are probably under eating, and they don't mean to be. Whether they're trying to, drop pounds, whether they're trying to become an athlete. We had a guy come, and I know that your audience is predominantly female, but we had a guy come to us. This is a guy who was running at a very high level, running marathons, signed up for Boston. Everything was great. Type 1, great blood sugar control, 1,400 calories a day.
Ooh.
Right. Like it hurt my soul. It legitimately hurt my soul. And thankfully, he was super compliant. We were able to get him up to a place where he was fueling properly. But that should just epitomize everything where it's so tough because it's constantly, oh, you don't need this, or oh, my blood sugar is running higher. I'm concerned about eating right now. But then they never replace those calories that their body needed. And then they're chronically underfueled, which then, quite honestly, cortisol goes up, blood sugar control becomes more difficult. And now they're in this perpetual cycle that's just nasty.
It's nasty. Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit for people who are trying to grasp that? My dietitian or the dietitians I follow on Instagram, et cetera, the stuff I've been reading makes me feel like I'm underfueling. And yet I'm having trouble with my blood sugars. Like, how do I wrap my head around the idea that I should probably eat more?
I think the biggest thing would be to first off, don't just jump up, a ton of extra fuel because that's also not going to probably serve you. And from a diabetes standpoint, it might make your life more complicated if your body's not used to it, you're not ready for it. And again, medication may be dependent type 1 or type 2, but if you're on insulin, you're going to have to adjust for that as well. I would say, again, working with your care team, ideally your dietitian, start stepping up. And if you don't know how many calories, am I eating enough? Am I not eating enough? Just, if you're willing to and it doesn't bother you from a, mindset perspective, plug stuff into a food journal. Just get an idea of where you're at right now and you'll find out, hey, I'm eating way less than I thought. And don't just do like a day. That doesn't count, right? Do like, 3, 4, 5 days. Okay, I'm eating way less than I thought. How can I slowly step this up slowly but surely to get to a place where I'm starting to feel better? You'll notice the difference pretty immediately. I mean, you'll feel the energy boost. You'll feel, everything just starting to get better and easier from a workout perspective as well.
Yeah. How do you go about to like for people who are trying to manage insulin, especially with that? Like what questions could they ask their own care team or what support could they seek to try to, yeah, just feel supported when they're trying to eat more, if that's kind of the problem that they've discovered?
I think it's going to come down to with their care team saying, okay, first from an exercise perspective, how am I supposed to prepare for my training? So if it's, hey, I'm having a longer run or I'm having a tempo run or whatever it might be, how am I supposed to prepare for this from a medication standpoint? Because that process is going to start 2, maybe even 3 hours before the workout begins. Because if you're not thinking that far out, you're probably setting yourself up for either a low blood sugar or a high blood sugar, or potentially just a higher likelihood of something occurring during that you don't want that's going to interrupt your workout. But then it becomes, okay, based on this, how am I then adjusting medication wise after I'm done to ensure A, I've hit, a higher calorie threshold, but B, to make sure I don't have any lower high blood sugars later on as well, because now that you've worked out, your body's way more insulin sensitive for at least the next 24 hours, if not potentially up to 72, depending how well trained you are. So
Yeah.
these are just some of the questions. I mean, obviously it gets deeper than this, but this is just some of it surrounding just the workout side of things.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So when you take someone to like even that client you use as an example, I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to. I know I got a lot of Boston marathoners here, Boston Marathon hopefuls. Like when you're talking to someone about like different types of workouts throughout the week. So yeah, like your short, easy run or your 20-mile long run or something that's a bit more high stress speed workout type of situation. How do you kind of help them navigate the crossover between doing what they need to do to address like what their actual numbers are for blood sugar purposes and insulin purposes versus like the basic sports nutrition recommendations of, eat carbohydrates before you run, eat 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates, per hour during those longer runs. What kind of things do you kind of help them try to understand so that they can make the right decision for their own bodies in the moment and plan ahead, like you said?
So we will typically, and again, because of the diabetes angle, we may skew a little lower carb than the typical recommendations, just because it will make life a little bit easier to manage. But on the flip side, like you mentioned, 60 to 90 carbs per hour while you're running, we might skew less, but we're still going to have consistent fueling during because you have to, you don't have a choice. But in addition to that, too, we're factoring in, okay, how much is this going to cause the blood sugar to drop? So if you're doing a 20-mile long run, you're going to have carbs at particular intervals. You'll have to have protein at some point during that from just a blood sugar standpoint alone, let alone performance side of things. And then we're looking at, okay, depending on the duration, depending on the intensity, what are you expecting afterwards? Because if it's a speed workout and it's more anaerobic, you may not need to do any medication adjustments after the fact. If you do a lifting session, you may not need to adjust anything. Your blood sugar might go up after that or during. But on the flip side, you're doing, a 10, 15-mile run, you may have to titrate down on insulin. You may have to consider if, type 2, your meds are going downwards. You may have to eat more than you expected just to be able to keep your blood sugar steady. And then you're still watching later on, if your glycogen's depleted, you're going to have to watch later on for a delayed blood sugar that could happen 12 hours after the fact, which is that constant, that fear that people have where I woke up at 2 in the morning, my blood sugar is 47. Why? Probably because you didn't end up fueling enough. Your body's looking to recover. Where can I get glucose? Oh, the blood sounds convenient. Boom. Now your blood sugar's low.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And again, like the middle of the night or like very early morning wake up, even again, if we don't have diabetes, is such like a flagship sign that I always tell my clients, like, this is a sign that we're probably not fueling enough because yeah, we're being woken up by the fact that our blood sugar is too low, even if it's not like critically low, like it could be with someone with diabetes. I have a question too, actually, that a couple of clients and just people have reached out to me about. So when it comes to like preparing for like a longer run or a marathon, again, sports nutrition recommendations usually revolve around like carb loading, increasing your glycogen stores. How do you help someone with diabetes navigate that?
So I'd say the biggest thing would be, of course, like you mentioned, some people may carb load the night before. In our case, it may not be as heavy of a carb load just because what we also don't want is cool. I ate 300 carbs at 6 p.m. and now my blood sugar's 350 the entire night. Now I'm going to run like garbage regardless. So I
Mhm.
would rather them focus on, okay, how can we elevate the carbs to a level throughout the day before, higher than they're used to. Day of, again, depending on the start time, which I know some of these races are just
It's
stupid
so
early.
hard.
Like it's
Yeah.
painful. I'm like, cool, you're gonna wake up at 3 a.m. No, I'm just kidding. That sounds miserable. But
Yeah.
hey, we're gonna make sure that you still have the carbs, but ideally we have to match the insulin to try to have most of it out of your system prior to the start of the race. Because if there's insulin on board while you're active, whether it's training, whether it's a race, there's a good likelihood that it's going to potentiate, it's going to be stronger, and your blood sugar will drop. Now, factoring in on a race day, it's different because there's adrenaline too, which can make your blood sugar skyrocket. So that becomes a person by person situation, depending how sensitive they are. But it really becomes looking, kind of back calculating when does the race start? How long do we have before? How can we get a good amount of fuel in you? And then knowing what's our game plan during for, hey, it might not be this huge carb burst at the beginning, but how can we have consistent throughout? Almost, I'm not going to call it like an IV, but like the equivalent of little, spurts every X number of minutes to make sure that your number stays flat. Like we had a guy do, it was Disney, the Disney one. They didn't do like, there's like the 5K, 10K. They didn't do
Yeah.
that whole
The
thing, but
challenge. Yeah.
yeah, but they did just like just the marathon, and
Yeah.
their blood sugars were between 90 and 130 the entire race, which is wild, but that's because they were constantly taking a little bit of glucose throughout.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a tough one too. Like you kind of do have to wake up at 3 a.m. for those just because they start at like 5 in the morning or something like that. Yeah, it's really hard to navigate too. Like I imagine the race day plan and nutrition piece, like you said, it's not just about like carbs, it's also about like traveling and time zone changes and wake up times and adrenaline and you being nervous and all of those things. So it can be really tricky to navigate and wanting to look at a couple probably different, like if this, then that type of strategies so that they can troubleshoot in the moment, depending on what, yeah, their blood sugars are actually reading.
Well, and the technology, thank the Lord, the continuous glucose monitors have been life-changing for so many people, myself included, because they
Yeah.
didn't exist predominantly, 12-ish years ago. I think I got my first one. So before that, it was, I'm going to have to stop during the race and finger stick. I'm going to have to do the, this manual test. Well, now let me just look at my watch. Oh, look, cool. My number's 127. Let me keep going.
Oh,
That's
sweet.
been huge for people. Plus the insulin pumps are helpful, but they're not, going to do everything for you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I was going to say, do you have any like recommendations in terms of technology that people look into who are in particular wanting like that type of benefit where they're running? Kiss of death for runners is like having to stop during a race for any reason if they have like a time goal. So, I mean, in terms of like, yeah, different things that you feel work well for that population. I know I'm getting asked that often. Like, is there a watch that's going to, be compatible with telling me my blood sugar, or are there like apps or things like that that can be helpful that hook up with the CGMs?
I mean, I'd say if you have diabetes type 1, type 2, pre whatever, CGMs are to me like an absolute prerequisite. Like they've just
Yeah.
got to be a part of the game. I don't actually have an Apple Watch, but I know a ton of people that do. And just being able to look, oh, this is my number, because otherwise you're looking on your phone. I will say for some people, if they can look on their phone, some have insulin pumps that are able to be controlled by the phone. So now they're not picking up the pump or they're not having to go find a separate device. So that can be super convenient. But those I would say are probably the two biggest things from a diabetes standpoint that aren't going to be some extra crazy like an Aura ring's not going to help you in the moment. Like the biggest thing is going to be, do you have access to your CGM very easily with your number? If you can look at your wrist, probably. And then can you dose easily if need be? Because that adrenaline spike, like I wouldn't tell someone to go nuts. Their blood sugar is really high. Oh, I need to take insulin. I have adrenaline. But at the same time, the adrenaline, once it wears off, your number will fall off a cliff. So just being mindful of that, I think, is really important. But tech, I wouldn't say anything super wild and
Yeah.
revolutionary.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the CGMs have come they're really helpful. For kind of the conversation around like practicing this in training and building this, I know something you talk about a lot is like kind of saying diabetes is kind of like a muscle, like it has to be trained each day, like just like you're training for this race. Can you talk a little bit about that and just like habits over time to build on that would help you do that to become a bit more familiar with what works for you?
I would say with this, it's always, at least in my mind, it's the repetition, but it's also literal dry runs of what you're doing. So like if you're going to be doing a race, I'm not saying wake up at 3 in the morning, but I would have the system down so well that you could theoretically do it in your sleep. So when the race does show up, you're just like, oh, I've done this a million times before. It's just the constant reps. You could even, I mean, there's been research out there that shows mental reps work too, right? If you actually visualize it. I think there was a thing with basketball where they had people shoot free throws and people visualize shooting free throws, and both groups have the same success rate, which is mind blowing. But if your brain's that powerful and you don't feel like waking up at 3 a.m., go through the entire process of, I woke up, here's what I did, this was the next thing, until you have that mentally down. And then having run through it, actual dry run a few times, you won't have the adrenaline component because it's not race day, but you'll at least have the rest of it. And again, the guy who I actually don't know if he ended up doing Boston, but the guy who did the Disney one, he was fantastic with it. I had someone else they ended up doing a 30-mile run, which was wild. It was supposed to be a marathon. They just kept going for whatever reason. I'm going to do a
Oh my
50K. I
God.
said, cool. I mean, that's awesome. But
Yeah.
similar situation for them. They were able to say, hey, I went through this a few times in advance during my longer runs to work up to, hey, at this interval, I'm doing this. And then when they got to the event, that's how they could keep going. So
Mhm.
I think it's really just repetitive nature again and again during the training to simulate what you're going to see in the actual, race day.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think the practice runs are so important. I mean, just even to get you like mentally confident so that yeah, you don't have to think about that stuff, especially because your nutrition is one of those like actual controllable factors. Like the weather you can't really control, like, if you're sick that week, you can't really control that, but nutrition's controllable. So if it's something that you're just like, "Ooh, I don't know what I'm doing" on race week, it's something that we can definitely have practiced like far ahead of time so you have a better idea and at least can find like some comfort even in it on race day. Um, do you, in terms of like people using different types of fuel and hydration during workouts and long runs, do you have any like favorite products or favorite like ways to break the dosing up of carbohydrates or stay on top of hydration and how that affects blood sugar for endurance athletes?
I would say the biggest things I've noticed is diabetes, and this would be endurance athletes or just people with diabetes in general. Electrolytes are a way bigger deal than people give credit for, especially in the blood sugar side of things. Like
Yes.
to the point where I've had times I have a stubborn high blood sugar. I go say, hey, I'm gonna have, one of the body armor zeros, and my blood sugar suddenly goes back to normal. And it's wild how much of a big deal potassium is. But I would say, at least from what I've seen and with, people who I've worked with and who we've worked with doing endurance sports, I would say body armor, and then the body armor packets, like the flash ones, have been amazing for people. But mainly, like the element has been fine for some people. Some people like the Pedialyte. Some of it, I tell them, just comes down to taste. Like if you like it, cool. If you don't like it, don't do it. But I would say potassium cannot be understated with how important that is. And then from a glucose perspective, I'm just like, whatever you can carry that's going to not be a big deal, but that you can do little teeny amounts. So some
Yeah.
people, they like the beans, right? I'm like, go for it. Some people, I don't, God bless you if you want to do glucose tablets, but that's on you. But like some people
Yeah.
are like, hey, I'll take whatever I can get that's super, super quick and easy. That's just, I'll do my low snacks. I'll take the gels. I'm like, that's
Yep.
fine as long as you're able to get them into smaller increments. Then, usually they come in 15 grams for lows. If you can get 8 and 15, to me,
Mhm.
that's perfect because sometimes you only need 8. Sometimes you only need, a little bit and you don't need the full amount. But those to me would be the biggest two. I just think the electrolytes people forget about constantly. And then it's not even the
Yes.
cramping, it's just the blood sugars just get wrecked. The higher if your blood sugar is high and you're low on electrolytes, you're in deep trouble.
Yeah, yeah. I find people underestimate electrolyte needs, especially sodium and potassium too, but especially sodium like very, very often. And it comes with blood sugar side effects, especially with diabetes. It can come with GI issues. It can come with all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good one. And just making sure that that's part of your fuel plan, just like I always talk about on this podcast, even if you don't have diabetes, a lot of those same products can work well. I know the body armor too is pretty high in potassium, but not sodium. So that's interesting that it seems to have like that effect on blood sugar immediately.
It's the potassium that tends to do it, at least from what I've seen. Because, and again, don't quote me. I have not, I cannot cite the paper for the research for this, but I'm like 97% sure that when your blood sugar is higher, the potassium's getting excreted more. So you
Mm,
end up lower in it, especially if your number's sitting at 240, 250, 300 for a long duration, which is why it seems to help bring it back into balance. So
yeah.
sodium, I feel like when you're not racing, and for a lot of people, I mean, not everybody, but for a lot of people, sodium comes a lot more naturally. Potassium, you have to work for more. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's where the coconut water, the body armor, those types of things can be helpful because the sports nutrition supplements typically have some potassium, but they definitely prioritize the sodium.
which understandably so, right? When
Right.
you're running 13 miles, 26 miles, however long, ultra marathons. I had one person do one of the triathlons, and that was talk about dry runs. That was a fun one. You have to do the transition of the dry run, the swim to the swim to the bike. That was we're gonna do this every 2 days until you have this nailed down kind of thing.
Yeah, triathlon without diabetes sounds yeah, like so hard logistically and something you really want to practice. So I can imagine, yeah, when you've got meds and like insulin and carbohydrates and blood sugar numbers in the mix, that's tricky, especially when you're swimming. Like you can't really, you can only do so much when you're
Right.
swimming.
And that's always the one I feel like that's the scariest part because swimming, for whatever reason, it just knocks your blood
Yeah.
sugar down so
Yep.
fast. Like, I mean, there are kids, and obviously kids' blood sugars are more volatile, but there are kids where your blood sugar is 300 and in 15 minutes you're 40.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. And it's like you don't even realize it because your face is in the water. Like
It,
it's so hard to check.
and you can't feel the symptoms as well. Like I will say from my own experience, I was 10 or 11 and I was, on the swim team, whatever. We had just done a 500 and that at the time was my favorite one. So I get out of the pool and I'm like, I'm just going to test on a whim. And I don't know what possessed me to do this. I'm really glad that the universe told me to do it because I tested and I swear to God, I was 23.
Oh,
And like I could have easily, passed out, had a seizure, had a huge problem. And I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I was like, cool, I've got my juice. I'm good. I'm sitting here. I'm done. But
yeah.
like it could have been a horrifying experience. So to your point, there are, I think if people do, wetsuits or whatever, there's stuff you can carry it with you. But again,
Yes.
you're in the water. Like we're gonna do
Mhm.
tread water while you're low. Like doesn't sound like fun to me.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little trickier. Yeah, I think with triathlon too, the dry runs, well, the dry runs or wet runs, like if you're in the pool, but those things are definitely really important because there's, I think, a lot more adrenaline and uncertainty on race day with those types of races, just because you have so many hoops to jump through to get from, yeah, like one event to the other. And same thing for like some of these bigger like marathons where yeah, you're getting on, a bus to drive to the start line and then you got to walk a mile and then you woke up at 5 but you don't start till 11. So like there can be a lot of hoops to jump through. So I think getting the practice runs in is really important.
Waking up at 5 but not starting until 11 sounds so painful.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's the Boston and New York are like that. The New York City Marathon in particular kind of kills me because I've never done it, but I mean, so many of my clients have done it and I've spectated. You have to take either a bus or a ferry to get to the island that it starts on, and then you all kind of get there around the same time, but then there's like different waves, and the last wave is typically like the slower times, so they're going to be out there the longest. So like they've gotten up at like 4, they don't start till like 11 or 12, and then they're out there for 5 to 6 hours, and it's the day after daylight savings time, so it's
Oh
also
no.
dark like at 4. And it's just like these people, like they have a completely different race than like the people in wave one, because they're talking about headlamps and like bringing their own fuel because sometimes the aid stations run out of fuel at that time. It's kind of horrendous that that's the case. But for some of these big races too, like the people I see running them who are trying to manage like chronic medical conditions like diabetes, I'm just like, you're a champ. Like it's so challenging logistically. So the more self-sufficient and self-reliant you can be, I think the better because you'll just have that confidence and not be so nervous to show up.
Well, and that's why I think those dry runs and the just running through the process, and again, even visualizing it, just it makes it so much easier because you can say, okay, at this point I'm doing this, at this point I'm doing that, etc. And yeah, I just can't fathom having to think about headlamps while I'm
Yeah.
running.
Yeah.
No, 0 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the day after daylight savings time every year, which is great because you get like an extra hour of sleep. But are you really sleeping?
Oh,
Probably
yeah.
not. Because you have to run a marathon and then it's dark. But anyway, I digress. If you're signed up for New York City listening to this, you will have a blast. It's a great race. But think about these things a little bit. So kind of like in that same vein of just like, you talk about getting diagnosed as a kid and you're told no, you're told you can't have it, you're told you can't do that, and that's really frustrating. And you've really done a great job personally, but then also professionally, like helping people break the mold of that. What are like some of the top things you want athletes with type 1 diabetes to know when it comes to like managing their health, but also pursuing their dreams long term?
I mean, I think the first thing has to be, and I feel like this is the most cliche thing in the world, but it does not have to be a obstacle unless you choose to make it one. Like there's tons at this point, especially professional athletes that have, type 1 diabetes and have had I mean, heck, there are NFL players with type 2 diabetes and have done just fine. So that needs to be the first thing squashed. Because if you're like, oh, this isn't going to happen, it won't happen. But if you think, hey, there's evidence that, NFL and MLB, NBA, all these, I mean, every major sport has someone with diabetes in it. So that's bar none the first thing. But I think beyond that, it really just comes down to, I know we've talked about it a bunch here, but the prep. How are you going to prep, whether it's practice or a game? What's your flow going to be for that? What are you going to do in advance? Thinking about that stuff in advance. And then during, important of depending on the length of it, but really before and after are your two big areas while you're focusing on practicing, training, etc. And then beyond that, it's going to be how can I make sure I'm mitigating adrenaline and how can I make sure I'm just keeping my number? It doesn't have to be perfect, but ideally, 120 to 180. It doesn't have to be perfect. If there's adrenaline that hits 180, you're going to come down when the adrenaline wears off. But how can I stay in those bars and not get overly concerned if I'm hitting 90, unless you're, playing soccer or something where your number could theoretically drop. But if you're, borderline, okay, I've got my glucose. If you don't have glucose, that's a preparation thing. So how are you going to prep? What are you going to do after to make sure you stay in a good range and recognize that none of this stuff is unattainable? Anything you want. I mean, people have climbed Mount Everest with type 1. Like people have done every one of the marathons that, you've mentioned and then some. Like it is doable with diabetes. It's a matter of how are you going to prep, who's going to lead the journey with you if you don't know what to do, and how are you going to dial in your training and also eat enough. That's the other thing I should say. But that
Yeah.
that goes without saying for anybody.
Yeah, don't be afraid to eat enough because it's only going to help you. And I think if you've got that confidence and some people on board to help you navigate that, that's definitely an important one. I love that because I think I think it depends probably, I imagine too, on like what age you get diagnosed and who is surrounding you at the time in your life. But like it's scary. Like you're kind of told, this is your fate, or like this is what it has to look like, or this is what's going to happen to you. But I love that you have that breath of fresh air insight on like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. And also you can do all the things you want to do. We just have to maybe prepare more specifically for what you need.
And that's, I think the biggest thing is it's just if somebody says, "Hey, you can't do blank," I always would turn around and be like, "Okay, watch me do it."
Watch me.
Because
Yeah.
well, and I was maybe, that was just me as a kid where I was defiant, but I hated being told that I couldn't do something. And I feel like that was before all this technology. Like I had a blood sugar meter that took a minute to read and, gouged my finger. And it felt like I was, just a geyser with my finger all the time. So now everything's there. You have all the tools to be successful. Just use them, take advantage of them. There's all the resources you need, whether it's on the internet, whether it's, working with your care team, you have everything you need. Just it's up to you if you're going to do it or not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the practice makes perfect and just being flexible over time with it because it might change what works well for you. Um, all right. So speaking of care team, where can people find you and your team and how can they work with you and take advantage of all the good stuff that you share?
So our website is yourdiabetesinsider.com. And then my social media is at Man of Zeal. So MANOFTZEEL. A play on my last name, which I think is clever, but maybe it's just me. I don't know. But that's effectively where we are. If you want to reach out, if people have questions, we've got tons of resources for people. And like we talked about before, nearly every member of my team has diabetes themselves. And the people that don't have 30 years of experience in the field. So they know it pretty darn well.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, go check it out. I'll link all of that in the show notes so people can go find you and your team if they are looking for some unicorns to work with because like I said, it's really rare to find people with type 1 diabetes who have it really good, expertise that's credentialed on working with people with type 1 diabetes and know stuff about sports nutrition. It's just very challenging to find the trifecta. Oh yeah, and like the training and exercise certifications that a lot of you have as well is so hard to find. So really appreciate that. I want to ask you the end of the podcast question. I don't think I warned you about this, so this will be a fun surprise. Um, but say you are finishing like the best race or best like workout of your life. It went perfect. Blood sugar's looking great at the end. Not a worry there. What song would be playing at the finish line to embody how you're feeling in that moment?
Oh man, I love this question. And I know the artist. I'm just trying to pick which song
Hmm.
from the artist. I think I would have to go with I Don't Get Tired by Kevin Gates.
Oh, I don't know that one. I'll have to check that one
Oh man, Kevin Gates is a great workout music, but
out.
also
Okay.
just a very he's definitely transformed over the years, but he has a lot of good messages in his music as well.
I mean, I don't get tired sounds perfect
Oh,
for
I
this
don't get tired. It's
situation.
like the perfect, it's literally the perfect song for this situation. But at the same time, like just he's become a lot, he's evolved as an artist, he's a much more positive person. But that song, perfect for this situation.
That's great. No one said that yet, which is always like it's fun when I get a new one. So I'll have to add that to the list. But thank you for sharing and thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. I hope people go check you out and or send people who need your help to your page so that you can help them.
Well, I was gonna say I'm grateful we got to have this chat. This is a lot of fun and definitely a lot of stuff that I've never gotten to talk about on any shows. So this has been amazing.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I hope to stay in touch and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much.